What is up YouTube, I'm Royal, I'm rank 1 Wildrift, and in this video I'm breaking down the best and worst champions of patch 5.2a. Let's get started with the Baron lane, where we're gonna have in the God tier, Darius, Renekton, Riven, and Aatrox. Of course, Darius and Riven received some massive buffs. Aatrox and Renekton are some of the best users of the new items, Eclipse and Sunder Sky, so that's mostly why they are in the God tier. However, all of the champions in the S tier can be just as good in the right situations. Fiora is one of the best anti-tank and 1v1 champions. Of course, Jax, after his rework, is absolutely insane as well. Garen did get slightly nerfed, however, he's still a great reliable pick in the Baron lane. Maokai, of course, got nerfed in pretty much every role. However, he still remains a dominant pick in the Baron lane if you are looking for a tank. Urgot and Sad, of course, incredible laning phases. Akali and Gragas, amazing AP options if your team needs AP. The biggest losers of this patch are definitely Teemo and Singed, who Singed is actually below Kayle in my tier list, believe it or not, because we had nerfs to both Riftmaker and Liandry's Torment, which of course were core items on Singed. Liandry's pretty core item on Teemo. Even though the nerfs are not massive, these champions were already struggling in the Baron lane, so they are going to be a little lower. Yasuo and Yone are actually a little higher than usual. Yone could even be in S tier under the right circumstances. Of course, the 5 extra AD in the Blade of the Ruined King item, which is really good in the Baron lane, since you don't really face a lot of magic damage dealers, which usually go Witsons versus magic damage, but since you're not really facing a lot of magic damage dealers, you're gonna opt for that Blade of the Ruined King, which of course just got buffed. Moving on to the jungle, and that's where we have a slight change. We finally have a new pick in the God tier, and actually have 2 new picks. I've been careful to not put Riven in God tier, despite me thinking she's really strong because I don't want to be biased. But I feel like I've seen enough to be able to put Riven confidently in God tier after the buff to her first ability cooldown and after the new items, which were great on her, right? And of course, Vi, who got some massive buffs in the previous patch, but you guys already probably know that Vi is really strong. So these are the 4 God tier champions of the jungle. I still think that Viego is a little better than all 3 of them. In my opinion, it probably goes Viego, Lee Sin, Vi, and then Riven. However, all 4 of these champions unbelievably strong if you can get them in the right team. Now we have, honestly, between S and God tier, I could put a different tier and just include Xin Zhao and Kha'Zix there, because they're better than the S tier champions, but they don't really cut it with the God tier champions. However, Kha'Zix and Xin Zhao are both extremely strong in this patch. Of course, Kha'Zix received a slight buff, and Eclipse also works great on him. And the rest of the S tier junglers are the usual broken champions. Talon did get nerfed, however, I still think he's an S tier jungler. I'm reluctant to drop him down to A tier. I think he's still an S tier jungler. And everyone in A tier, of course, is still playable and really strong under the right circumstances. Jarvan actually received some really good buffs, so Jarvan's pretty strong. Jax is of course strong in the jungle as well. Nyla is like a turbo 1v9 pick in the right circumstances. Yone with a Blade of the Ruined King, build can still do a lot of damage. I would probably recommend staying away from the B and C tier junglers and definitely stay away from Twitch as well. I would like to point out that Shen, even though he's in B tier, I think if you play with like pre-mades in 5s, or if you play with like a duo, Shen can be really good because his ult is an extremely powerful spell in the jungle as well. So you can counter jungle, you don't need to defend your turrets, so you don't lose anything by ulting. So you could easily be A or even S tier if you're playing with pre-mades. In the mid lane, we of course have the Lixandra, Castleyn, Jace trio from last patch. They continue to dominate, but I have added Yasuo into the God tier champions. Yasuo has always kind of been between God and S tier. I've had him in God tier in previous tier lists, but eventually I dropped him off. I think he's an incredible pick in the Blade of the Ruined King buff, which is not necessarily what you usually go, however you can go. Helps even more with that. So I definitely think putting Yasuo into God tier makes sense. In the S tier, of course, we have the other really strong mages like Syndra and Ziggs and Morgana, of course, with her second ability, Permanent Wave Clear. Corki is a bit of a mage, I guess. And of course, the assassins that are dominating right now, like Kali and Zed after recent buffs, is definitely S tier as well. Diana received some really nice buffs a while back. She's really strong. Yone, similar with Yasuo, again with Blade of the Ruined King, can be super deadly. In A tier, we have some of the champions that you can still pick. They're still really, really strong. However, definitely not as strong as the S and God tier champions. And I would probably stay away from the B tier champions unless there's a perfect situation for them, right? There's many opportunities where Asol can actually be a really, really good champion. There's many opportunities where Katarina can be a really good champion. However, you just have to pick them in the really right situations. And in C tier, of course, I have the champions that I just don't consider very good. I think Talon is really weak in the mid lane, for example. Moving on to the ADCs, and of course, Varus continues to dominate as the best ADC. He has been the best ADC for a long time, and he even received a buff recently. So Varus has his own tier of ADCs. I think that he's definitely the strongest ADC by far. In God tier, I have actually included Kalista, who benefits from the Blade of the Ruined King changes, since it's a pretty core item on her. I was already, and I think I might have mentioned in my previous tier list, I was already willing to put Kalista into God tier. If you're really, really good on her. However, Kalista is actually one of the most difficult ADCs to play. But if you can play her well, she definitely belongs in God tier with Ezreal and Xayah, who are both ADCs that do a lot of damage while being extremely safe, which is extremely important in this meta where everything feels like it does way too much damage, right? So having the survivability of Ezreal and Xayah with her ulti and Ezreal's blink definitely helps. In the S tier, we have the typical hyper carries with the addition of Samira after some nice buffs. Caitlyn's range keeps her safe. Kai'Sa, of course, with her ulti is always safe and her invisibility. Zeri is one of the safest hyper carries in the game, again, so with ADC we are prioritizing safety quite a bit. And in the A tier you have pretty much the rest of the ADCs that are still good, however, definitely not as good as the S, God, and of course Varus tier ADCs. In B tier I have the ADCs that is considered pretty weak. The only one that I think is a little stronger than the others is probably Jhin, if you mostly want to be a supportive ADC and help out your team. Jhin is a decent choice, however I would still put Ashe above him in that role. And Vayne is really good with Lulu. If you don't have Lulu on your team, you don't want to play Vayne. The rest of the ADCs are not really good. I just have them there to hopefully discourage people from picking them by putting them so low in my tier list. Definitely don't play Kindred or Akshan on the ADC role. For support, moving forward, in the God tier, Nautilus has dropped because of his ulti nerfs. The cooldown is a little bigger now, so you can't just be spamming it all the time, which is what previous Nautilus could do. You have to be a little more selective with it. He's definitely still an S tier support. However, I think Maokai and Lulu are just clearly better than him. Lulu is by far the best enchanter support, and Maokai is probably the best engaged support right now. In the S tier, we're going to have other picks like Braum, who's actually a great answer to defensive supports. Braum will honestly be God tier because he's just so good against engaged supports like Pyke, Thresh, Nautilus, Maokai, but he's extremely weak against enchanters, right? There's nothing he can do against a Lulu or a Soraka, so it's really hard to put him above S tier because of how easy he is to counter. He's just not a great blind pick. However, Braum is an extremely strong support right now. The rest of the enchanter supports are just not on Lulu's level, however they're still really good, and that's Karma, who's a bit more of a mage, Yuumi, and Janna. In the A tier, of course, we continue to have the rest of the supports that, the rest of the enchanter supports and the rest of the tanks. However, they all have their niche. Like every enchanter support, like Soraka, Nami, Seraphine, and Sona, can be really strong if you play them correctly. However, they're just not on the level of Lulu, right? In the B tier, we have some more supports that are a little unconventional. I'd say stay away from the supports that are B and C tier. You can make them work if you want to. They're a little cheesy and they do rely on the enemy being kind of bad. Galio probably being the exception. Galio could even be an A tier, to be honest, though. He's actually not that bad. But the rest of the supports are more niche picks. I've also been seeing a lot of Jarvan support. I'm not going to include in my tier list, but Jarvan would be probably B tier if he were to be included. So that is it for my tier list. I hope you guys learned something from the tier list, and I want to know what picks you're using to dominate this patch. So please let me know down below what picks are hidden OP that I might have missed, and what picks you think I have just way too high in the tier list that you think are pretty weak. Please let me know. I would love to discuss down in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like on this video and subscribe for more Wild Rift content.